Hey, and welcome back. Nice thing you're joining me today again, since we have an interesting topic to cover, which is loops. In general, loops are important for repetitive tasks in your code. Imagine you had some routine that should be executed more than once, let's say maybe 50 times. Yeah, it would simply be horrible to copy and paste all that code so many times. And that is where loops come in handy. A loop always consists of two parts. We have the code that should be executed in every loop or in every iteration. And the second thing is we need to tell our program how often or how long it should execute this code. And that is why we need a condition. That could be, for example, counting a number from 0 to 10, and once it reaches 10, it should stop the loop. Another basic thing we need to consider is that there's two types of loops. I've made a really crappy picture again to show you just that. One type of loops, which is here on the right, has its condition for stopping the loop at the beginning. So the program flow would be first checking the condition. Like here we have while x is smaller than 10, and if that turns out to be true, execute the code. We would enter the loop and execute the code, and after the execution of the code we would move back to the condition, check again if it's still true, and if so, enter the loop again, and so on. The other type of loops has its condition for stopping after the code. That means the code will in every case be executed once. So we enter right here, execute our code, and after that we check our condition. If it turns out to be true, we would enter the code again and execute it, and check the condition again afterwards, and and so on. Okay, so let's start with the loops that have their condition at the beginning, which are those here. The first loop I want to show you is the while loop. To do so, we first have while, followed by parentheses, where we will put our condition in, and the usual curly brackets. Now as a condition we need a boolean value. So we could either create a boolean variable and set its value to true for the time we want to keep looping, and switch it to false once we want to get out of the loop. Or we could simply use the boolean expression directly as our condition, like in the picture where it said while x is smaller than 10 or something. So let's first declare an integer variable called counter for us, which we will increment then. So int counter, set it to 0, and we can now increment our counter. We want to do this at the end of the code inside the loop. So usually you would think to do this that way, simply counter equals counter plus 1. However, in C# there are two preferable ways. The first one being simply typing counter plus plus. This will always increment our counter by 1 and only by 1. And in case you want to increment in other steps, like you want to increment by 10 each iteration, you would use the following. Simply plus equals and then the number. So basically those do exactly the same. However, this can only increment by 1, and this can increment by any step you want. You can also, instead of incrementing, type minus minus, so it will decrease each time. However, since we want to increment by 1, we don't need this right now, and we simply don't use that. So counter plus plus it is. Next we need a string. We need a task we want to repeat a couple of times, and as I told you in the last video, you could use strings like an array of characters. So that gives us the possibility of iterating through a string, character by character. So let's do that right now. we will create a string variable called text and use hello world again. And in each iteration we want to print a character at the index of our counter. So text at index of counter. And yeah, since our string contains 12 characters in total, we will want to loop only those through those characters, so index 0 to 11. Or else we will receive an error or a so-called exception, because if we try to print out our text at index 12, we would try to get a value from our string, or I'll just call it an array right now, with an index that is not within its boundaries. So text at index 12 simply does not exist. So our condition would be while counter is smaller than 12. Could also say smaller or equal to 11, just basically the same thing. Yeah, so then we hit a 5, and as you can see, it printed out every letter separately. Maybe things become a little bit more clear if I just give me a second. So this line here will make our program wait or pause each time it executes this line. So now it will be a bit slower. Yeah, and as you can see, it prints out every single character at a time. Okay, so that was the while loop. The next thing I wanted to show you is basically another way to achieve exactly what we've done right now. And it's usually the preferable way if you want a number to increment to a specific value and use that as your condition. It is called a for loop. Yeah, a for loop has the following syntax. We type for, followed by parentheses again, and our curly brackets. And now in those parentheses, we'll put three things combined: a counter variable, a condition to be fulfilled, and the step we want our number to use for incrementing. So we type int I, set it to 0. I is like a common name for loop integer variables, or yeah, most people use single letters for that. Then our condition, which is basically the same again as we had in our while loop. And in the end we say I++ because we want to increment by 1. And each of those three components in our for loop are separated by a semicolon. Okay, so we can simply copy that and switch counter to I, because that's what we'll want to use. We don't need that anymore actually, and the counter thing, we don't need that either, but yeah, let's we'll need that later. Okay, hit a 5 again, and as you can see, it does exactly the same thing, except we don't have to count up our variable down here, but instead it always gets incremented right here. Okay, as you can see, it's the best way to simply increment a counter and use it for indexing in a collection like an array. Now the third loop we're doing in this video is the do-while loop. This is also the loop where the condition is in the end, meaning that we will execute the code at least once before evaluating our condition. We do this as follows. We type do, then curly brackets, because our code gets right here, and afterwards we type while, parentheses, semicolon, and in those parentheses we put our condition again, which is basically the same as in the while loop, while counter smaller than 12, and we need our counter to increment again after each iteration, and we want to print out our text again at index counter, and yeah, this is basically the do while loop. We had a 5, and as you can see, this also prints out hello world, one character at a time. Okay, I think that's it for this video. I hope I could explain everything in an understandable way. In case there is anything still unclear, feel free to ask me anytime and I'll gladly try to explain it more thoroughly. Yeah, so thank you guys for watching and see you in the next video.